Hi, everyone. Welcome to the panel. I'm just going to start by introducing myself, and then I will turn it over to everyone else to introduce them. But thank you so much for joining us here tonight. I'm super excited for the conversation we're going to be having this evening. So like I said, I'm going to start introducing myself. My name's Amali. I am a current visual media arts student here at Emerson, and I'm going to be moderating the panel tonight. But first, I just want to give it over to my other panelists here tonight. So if you guys just want to unmute yourselves and introduce yourselves.
Should I just jump in?
Yeah, just jump in.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Ruth Saccharin. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. And I'm really glad to be with all of you here this evening. Thanks for having me.
Good evening. My name is Michael McPheeters. I am a criminal defense attorney in Southwest Virginia. I have offices in Martinsville and Danville, and soon in Roanoke. I've been doing this now for almost 15 years. Former public defender and prosecutor. I'm happy to be here this evening.
And we're actually going to have Jamal introduce himself a little bit later. So how this is going to work, I have some questions prepared tonight for you all, and then we can open up to questions from our attendees. So yeah, first I will just start with a couple of my questions. First, I just want to talk about what some of your takeaways were from the film Racially Charged. If you guys just want to talk about, any takeaways you had, anything that resonated with you and the work that you do.
Something that struck me, first of all, I thought it was a great film. Not only did I learn some things that I didn't know, as for example, 80% of all criminal cases are misdemeanors, but it was also very motivating for me to really appreciate the consequences that even minor crimes can have on people's lives. Being a criminal defense attorney, sometimes even myself, I tend to only think about, the cases that could send my clients to prison for a very long period of time. And perhaps I haven't been as sensitive to the consequences that misdemeanors can have on people's lives. So I definitely appreciate the message of this film because true indeed, a lot of people are really impacted by petty criminal offenses.
Absolutely. Ruth, do you want to speak to that too?
Yeah, similar to Michael, I actually sat looking at my laptop screen for a while after watching the video, just feeling a lot of feelings. And it's hard to untangle all of that succinctly. But one of the things that I was thinking about a great deal is just the level of trauma that ends up being inflicted on folks because of these misdemeanors. Long-term trauma. It's not just traumatic in the moment, but that long-term impact on someone's life. In my past role prior to coming to the coalition, I did a lot of trauma response work, mostly with survivors of domestic and sexual violence, but many of them had experiences with the criminal justice system and got to see and hear stories of that traumatic impact and separation from families and children and loss of jobs. And so I've heard the individual stories, but there was something about watching that and hearing the aggregate of the larger impact and how many folks have been affected. It was just so painful.
Absolutely. Something that really stood out about the film to me was specifically the way that they would kind of juxtapose these stories from so long ago with stories that were so recent. Just that direct, just putting them right next to each other on the screen, and you can really see how similar these stories are, despite being, a century, multiple centuries, however many years apart. And that's something I want to talk about with the both of you is the history of our criminal justice system in America, and how slavery has impacted the criminal justice system. So if the both of you could just talk about how the history of slavery directly impacts to what we see today, that would be fantastic.
One of the things that really struck me with the film was the fact that a lot of these petty crimes do in fact give law enforcement discretion in terms of who to detain, who to arrest. And I truly believe that that is part of the objective. There are laws on the book in Virginia, class 1 misdemeanor for loitering or littering. You can receive a fine of up to $2,500 and 12 months in jail. So it really became apparent to me by looking at the film, some of the history that has indeed led to that. And I do see it still play out today. I've seen countless cases of people engaged in similar conduct, but depending on who those people would depend on how they were treated by law enforcement. So I definitely think that perhaps nowadays legislators may have had pure intent when they have enacted some of these laws, perhaps. But I definitely think there needs to be more discussion on having such a wide range of offenses for which a person can be incapacitated.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I was thinking about today, and this isn't totally related to your question, but I think we'll get there. Today there was an op-ed in the Globe about the impact of incarceration on our democracy related to voting and disenfranchisement of communities, because folks are counted as, we're really non-voters because we don't give incarcerated folks the right to vote, but in the communities where they're being incarcerated as opposed to their home communities, disenfranchisement of folks who are incarcerated. And I think the reason I think of that with your question is sort of, slavery being the antithesis of democracy, yet the history of slavery leading us to where we're at with our criminal justice system still has this tremendous impact in so many ways on our democracy. But I learned a lot just from reading that op-ed today and understanding how prison gerrymandering based on this old system, related to slavery, is still having such a dramatic impact on just individual and collective and communal rights. So that's what I was also sitting with. If folks haven't had a chance to look at this op-ed, it's in today's Globe. It really is an important read.
So we actually have Jamal just hopped on. So Jamal, do you want to introduce yourself? And also if you want to answer the question we just asked.
Yes.
I'll rephrase. It was how, oh, sorry.
Yeah. Jamal A. Spencer. Currently, I'm the outreach director for the AACC, which is the African American Coalition Committee for MCI Norfolk. What I do essentially is I connect our organization with outside resources to help us so we can stay viable in the community, so to speak, especially men who are returning back to the community. So we seek to identify, align, and diligently work with all those who are committed, to our productive development, as well as the productive development of our community.
Thank you, Jamal. And I was also just wondering if you wanted to answer the question we had just spoke about, which was just talking about how slavery is so embedded in our criminal justice system and how it has impacted the criminal justice system and how it has changed it.
Yes.
Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, as far as I thought you said you had some questions. But the way I see it, I can give it to you like this here, like per se. Like for me, like when the real cost of what I'm dealing with right now is like entirely like this phone. All the phones are hanging up on us, right? And they're saying essentially just like the visits. They're all interconnected, and they're saying that this is because the phone system is in Texas, right? So, but we have to pay. We're at the end of that totem pole. We have to pay for that. There's no recourse, for that whatsoever. So, and then essentially, how what's happening to us here is, and I'll give you an instance for the men here who have jobs, so to speak. Like there's something wrong with one of us medically. We have to pay for that. And I think that's, if I'm supposed to be awarded a state, so to speak, our, health-wise, you're supposed to take care. In my estimate, they're supposed to take care of me to maintain my health. Well, overall, none of that is essential. So when they say the care and custody, so I don't know what that really means nowadays. But for us in here, that means that we are fully responsible, right, for our well-being. So you do have things like in the canteen where you can buy aspirin, you can buy certain things where it comes down to your hygiene or your health, like vitamins and things with iron and stuff like that. And you can do that for those who have that money. For those of us who don't, it's just that your health will diminish. So for me, overall, the things that I can touch bases on is things like nutrition, the lack thereof, the food that's served. Like I'll tell you, some of the best food they serve here is the food that's expired. So when you look at these things, and yet I always speak about the toxicities that exist and that you can bring back out in society. That is a cost to me.
The caller has hung up.
So I'll just hop in and say that that was exactly what Jamal is speaking about in terms of lately the phones, when they pay for a call, they should theoretically be able to get 20 minutes of a call. And there's a connect fee every single time. And lately we're getting maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. And so then he has to call back and there's a connect fee plus then the charges beyond that. And so as you can imagine, all of this starts to add up. And I'll just say, I'm not officially a part of the panel, but I'm Tamia Jordan, Director of Intercultural Student Affairs. Pronouns are she, her, hers, and I work closely with Jamal and the AACC.
Thank you, Tamia.
Amali, if I could add something else, because the situation with the phone just really reminded me of something that just a realization that I just had here recently. It seems that our penal system is designed to dehumanize people. I see a lot of examples where it is just the norm for prison officials, correctional officers, guards to just be extremely disrespectful. There seems to be just like it's like that's what the program is, if you will. It's not really to rehabilitate, but rather to dehumanize in some respects. And I do think that that's a vestige from slavery. I think that our criminal justice penal system, there's absolutely no attempt to try to build up people that are incarcerated, but just the exact opposite. It seems like that everything that being incarcerated entails is a form of subjugation and just basically bringing people down, which I think, contributes to recidivism and a sense of hopelessness and a sense of feeling less deserving. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we do have the level of recidivism that we have. It's just like that, you can't even have a 20-minute phone call. I mean, that's something that should be fixed. But I bet you that there's absolutely no priority for them to do that, because they just don't, they want to demonstrate that they don't care. And that is definitely something that I think that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. And something also that Jamal's point about the phone and the fees that is bringing up for me is a lot of the what the film talks about is how the criminal justice system and capitalism kind of exploit prisoners, and the fees just keep racking up and racking up. And then by the time you're out of jail, you have all these fees, and it's like, how am I supposed to pay with this? And on top of that, then you cannot, in many places, they won't give you a job if you have committed a crime. So then there's really no way to pay off those fees. So yeah, the film really talks about the parallels between law and money. And that's definitely a threading point between the film. But I was wondering if all of the panelists could talk about this intersection between law and money and capitalism, and how it how it affects the criminal justice system. How has money affected the criminal justice system in your work? And I think we have Jamal back.
Yeah. Jamal, do you
So,
want? Yeah, go ahead.
yes, if I may, what resonates for me when you say that? So I like to go from arrest of entry. From the first time I was arrested, and then they send someone to come ask me about how old I am, how far I go in school, about my background, my parents, that have a job, my income, and then still your bail is so and so. You just gave me $1 million bail when I told you I couldn't even make 100. And so with that, when I look at those practices and what's not going to be afforded to me or anyone else to do so, I'm now coming into a system and I'm going to cost my mother and different members of my family to help pay for my incarceration. That's through clothes, phone calls, visits, whoever they got to go through, lawyer fees, all these things compile, in which I would have to say is essentially how my mother lost her house, trying to fight for her son. So with that said, now when I come to prison, they have a system. At first that was, I want to say, was kind of working. They had vocations, you can get college degrees, and you can get out and you have all these connections. All that stopped. It's gone. And so when it makes it easier, when you have no college degree, you have no vocational skills to go back out into society and fall on. However, they have what's called industries. Industries has all these names on it. Mind you, when casinos, we have their sugars and stuff in there. Bob Barker, he has clothes and stuff in here. All these names, I must say, are conglomerates. But if I can work for you in here, and I can't work for you out there in what's called the free world, do you see, because of a Corey, how was it even possible that you even have a vested stake in this industry? It's on the stock market, and they're part of the stock market. So my thing was, it was basically a conversation I had with Liz Moran today. Like, hold on, this has to change. Because we have people that are so vested in this industry, but yet you will keep me at bay out in society, or you don't qualify, or because you're ready to spend. That sets people up for failure or grit. But while I'm here, I can work for you. And I don't want to be redundant in that fact, but I just want to keep stating it, that while I'm behind these walls, if I can work for you, I should work for you anywhere, regardless to my qualifications. Because paper here, so to speak, it only costs what? Most men here making $1, that is top. That is top. $1, $2 a day. The least minimum charge is like 50.
The caller has hung up.
Okay, so I think we lost Jamal, but Michael and Ruth, did you want to speak to that point? Oh, sorry, and I'll just
tell who's
repeat the
going to talk
question.
next.
Just talking about how capitalism and money intersect with the law and criminal justice.
Yeah, the example that's coming up for me, I've been involved with advocating for the Safe Communities Act. If you're not familiar with it, it's around the rights of immigrants to live safely in the Commonwealth. And at one of those hearings, I remember hearing a particular sheriff who has been involved in detaining immigrants in his facilities talk about how doing so was a money-making venture for the state. And that was his justification for continuing to engage in separating immigrants from their families. And it was sort of like the quiet part was really said out loud in that moment, and in a way that was just completely horrifying. That this was his justification, was that we were making money for the Commonwealth out of engaging in this practice. And that is one of there's so many glaring examples of those connections, but that was the first one I thought of when you asked the question.
Thank you.
After watching the video, I jotted down that I think that going forward, I'm going to be more cognizant and sensitive to the financial burdens of court, and I'll be honest. Um, when I am in court, the first thing that I'm thinking about first and foremost is my clients, you know, hopefully being acquitted, or certainly mitigating their circumstances as best as possible, often as it relates to incarceration. I'll be honest that I haven't really thought much about, court costs and things of that nature that goes along with my indigent clients. But um, true indeed, these costs become like an avalanche. That your license gets suspended for not paying court costs. Then of course you lose your job, et cetera, et cetera. Fortunately, Virginia has now changed that there is absolutely no connection now between failure to pay court costs and the loss of your license. But certainly that financial aspect. But as it relates to capitalism, I mean, everything in jail costs. I mean, whether it's phone calls, it's text messages, whether it's food. I mean, just about all of the people that I've known to be in a prison system, they seek, commissary or food that other than what's served. And again, I mean, it's just like the penal systems may be incentivized not to provide good quality, good tasting food, because that's going to send the inmates to purchase food through commissary. So, I definitely think that there needs to be more discussion about not over penalizing people, because in essence, it's the families oftentimes that have the limited resources in the first place that are going to be ultimately responsible for paying these costs. And I get it. There's crimes been committed. There needs to be consequences, but I definitely think that we should not let capitalism go unchecked in our criminal justice system.
Absolutely. Given the activism over the summer surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement, there's certainly been a lot of conversation about criminal justice reform. And I'm curious to hear from all of you, what future do you envision moving forward for the criminal justice system? What changes do you want to see?
I love that question. So I'm going to jump back in again. What my concern is that, certainly there's a lot of discussion about overpopulation and overcriminalization, which, those are things absolutely that we need to be discussing and we need to be addressing. But I think we also simultaneously need to be addressing the environmental factors or the circumstances which lead people into the criminal justice system in the first place. Because we only deal with, incarceration numbers, right? Then does that really actually speak to criminal behavior and criminality in our communities and people perhaps being victims of crime? So I don't think that it's a one-pronged approach. Like, certainly there needs to be a lot of discussion about changing our criminal justice system. But I think at the exact same time, there needs to be a lot of discussion about the socioeconomics, the environmental factors that lead people into the criminal justice system in the first place.
Absolutely. I want to let Jamal speak since I know we have him back on the phone.
Would you restate the question for Jamal?
Yes, of course. I was just wondering, what do you envision for the future of criminal justice reform?
Say that again. What was that to me?
It's what do you envision for the future of criminal justice reform?
What is our vision?
Yes, yes. What needs to happen to reform?
Well, now, I believe what needs to be done, when you're talking about the criminal justice reform and its revision, when we're talking about, and here personally, and we're talking about education, We're talking about men dealing with certain rehabilitative factors, family reunification, what that looks like. For me, that is about making sure men do not leave out of here. I can say this all day. Don't leave out here under the same, pretenses in which when they first came in. So they have to be. To me, it's what education. What does education aspect look like? We have programs in place here, but men don't take these programs seriously because let's say, for instance, restorative justice. Restorative justice is a practice that did come out of Africa, out of two war infractions, and then from that they found reform and one another, as far as what that healing process looks like holistically. And here, for me to even say that I have some type of reform, if I've never ever dealt with the impacted party, or should I say the people I victimized, and heard how I impacted them. For those that, when you can hit the heart of a person, to me that is something else. So they're trying to implement that in certain bills now. But when you go through the actual sort of justice process here, that's missing. That's one. That's just one. So in the parole board, when I dealt with the parole board for the first time, they shut the people down who were talking to me that I affected, only because they weren't saying keep them locked up, like they thought they would be doing. So when you have a process that is biased off rip like that, they sought that family to come against me, and when that didn't happen to their benefit, they shut them down. So you're looking at processes that need to be looked at, and then who's the benefit? If you're going to talk about a prison, like how you got a prison out here and there's some restoring rights and all this for voting, but now you have it where they want to count me consensually here in Norfolk instead of where I'm actually from in Boston and Dorchester, because the stakeholders, or should I say the constituency out in Boston, are really saying, okay, let's do this as far as helping men come back out to their families. But you want to negate all that by saying, no, put them with somebody who don't even know my plight or haven't been through it. And in any situation, are going to, I don't even know what their political platform is whatsoever. But and in that case, if you even understand why they took the right for us to vote, right, and what they said, I mean, you would have to read case law to see what they was actually saying. You will know that when it comes to reform, when it comes to all these things, I'm saying you have a system that's not broke, so we got to revamp the whole thing. You're talking about reforming something, they don't care about those words that are being used. Have very little meaning, just as much as I can say those who put that certain constitution in place, you have very little meaning in those aspects. So when you want to look at the birth of something and why it's in place, or why it should benefit you at all, you have to go to the people who put it in place, and then what were they about? So for us to be talking about reform, and to talk about policy changes and things of that nature, we have to really say people are going to be questioning who we are, what we're about, and why we want this to happen. For me, I would love to see men in here go back to their families, but is everyone deserving of that? So I know we're talking about reform, but we're talking about you have to reform and calibrate men and women's thinking and their hearts. Other than that, if you release, and I'm playing both sides of the fence right now. Other than that, you'll have people coming out of here like how I was when I first was young and foolish. I just, beat this case. Oh, I'm untouchable. And with that, all the work that we'll be doing will be all for nothing. So if you really want to get into how people are thinking and the heart of the matter and how they're really sitting here right now, what they're doing. Because every second of the day that's being spent, not first and foremost, restructuring and reforming yourself. There's no law, there's no policy that's going to serve, except to say what goes around comes around. So I'm saying right now, everything's in our benefit right now. That's what I'm basically saying. Everything's in our benefit as far as it's so loud, it's reverberating so loud. Criminal justice reform, the recidivism is crazy because it's that. Defund the police and all that. Down with prisons, but the minute someone does something idiotic, it's going to go back to being tough on crime. Unless you get the people themselves and you get the things in place. Right now we have a program here called Alternative Violence. You should see the things that they're doing here. They're playing with yarn. You want me to throw around a yarn? And there's a part of it called when the wind blows. So if someone yells at everything that we're doing in the program, it stops and everyone plays musical chairs. These are grown men doing these, like, they're not even, they're games for children. I'm like, no, we're not doing that. So when you talk about what's going on in the programs here for grown men, there's nothing that gets to the heart of the matter as to why this person committed this crime. So you have to look at the things that are in place, and then who has been placing the benefits of why that's being in function. And for me, criminal justice reform means coming in here, letting you see, especially, and for me, the nuance is the people who really care. We have like such, everyone I'm on this phone with, that they will allow you to come in here and do like a walkthrough, coming through the programs and really engaging the men. And because you're the future, especially as the students, you will be like the future doctors, the future lawyers, the future judges, prosecutors, and so on. So you will really get to see the change that you need to affect and the lives that you'll be affecting. Opposed to what I just heard somebody say, they never really thought about what they was really seeing as far as to their clients, because they didn't really know that person as a person or the system that they was being as far as being a part of, and overall, how was that really playing a part in as far as everyday lives. So for me, my everyday life consists of living a life where I'm constantly running. I have no trust in the police. I'm doing things because maybe a friend of mine, I'm with, he's doing criminal stuff. So even though I wasn't a criminal at that time, I'm hanging out. I'm gonna run anyway. But I ain't got nothing on me. But if I didn't run, that's when I got my introduction to law. Why'd your friend run? I don't know why he did. So I'm gonna beat you up. I got took a beating to the point where I hated them so much. I started doing what my friends were doing. I started being how they were being, and I said I'm gonna be worse than them just because of that engagement with that. So with systems, a bunch of different systems in play that criminalize, will sway you to be a criminal. You're not thinking about school no more because that has no interest in you. So we're all going interconnected. But it's how do we go about, I'm going to use the word attacking. How do you go about attacking the system that's constantly attacking you with all these, what I know now say would be microaggressions? And so that you're not pushed for a certain way. You're not saying that, they say I'm a criminal, so I'm a beer criminal. But for me, it's just about knowing, really knowing who I want to be today, who I am today. And even though there's a system in play, for me, it's about maintaining my humanity. And so in here, like I said, I'm looking at a bunch of men playing poker when there's just so much going on right now. But they haven't, because it's pandemic. And you're going to really see some things going with this pandemic. Like they're raising the price of canteen right now, as I'll speak to you right now. I can't afford that. And so when they keep doing the food the way they're doing the food, where you got, oh my God, the hamburger's raw, and it's not even a real hamburger, or the chicken is raw, you get salmon. All these things will force you. These are costs. So from that, either I'm going to keep getting sicker and sicker. Then you got to question why men at Norfolk getting cancer. Men who are, if you look at them, these dudes got six packs, muscles on top of muscles, but their insides are tore up. Why is that? So when you want to look at things that's really going on, and they're not going to really let you come in with cameras, you got to ask why. What do you got to hide? And then from who? So you're out there, but until they'll let you come in here and actually see what's going on, we're going to keep doing what we're doing now. And then we're going to keep trying to guess and keep trying to follow and keep trying to chase. But when you can see it, they can't pull no wool over your eye. And I'm jumping around because, the things I see just have me so, I won't say angry, but it has me emotional. To me, something I told you earlier. But the people who don't really care are the men who are in here and watching right now. And it's probably like this in every unit, playing the table game. Well, those are your real cause. And these are the same men who will be back out in the community. So you have to be able to know how to engage them and be engaged yourself. That's all I can think of, being engaged.
Thank you, Jamal, for sharing that and sharing your experience. Before Ruth answers, I just want to say that we are more than halfway through our time tonight. So if you have a question for our panelists, please put it in the Q&A section and we will answer it after this. But first, I want to give Ruth a chance to answer. What do you envision for the future of criminal justice reform?
So every time I talk to Jamal, I learn a great deal and I learn something profound. So I think if it's Jamal's vision that's directing this work moving forward, that's what I hope will happen. I hope it's the folks who've been most directly impacted who get to say what needs to change. And that becomes how we move forward. So in the short run, I hope we can do a lot more to be in deep conversation and listening with the folks who have been most impacted by mass incarceration and take their wisdom and figure out how we implement change based on their lived experiences.
Absolutely. Anna actually sent in a question that was from Cinesen, so from people watching the film, and it's about the current presidential administration. It says the current administration has said that racial injustice reform will be a top priority. What can we expect, and in what time frame should we expect it? So I don't know if you guys know anything about that.
I believe also part of that question was this going to be state or nationally? Well, certainly the administration can only really address the federal criminal justice system. Certainly I think that there's going to be a reevaluation of mandatory minimum sentences. Certainly, perhaps the length of sentences that go with nonviolent crimes. There really needs to be a true push throughout the country on the state level for criminal justice reform. But again, the political landscape is different depending on the state. But I definitely think that the Biden administration is going to make some real positive changes when it comes to criminal justice reform on the federal level. And they're going to follow some of the progress that was actually made under the Trump administration as it relates to that. Now, the timetable, I'm not sure, but that appears at least to have a lot of bipartisan support. So I do suspect that there will be some progress there.
Just to add to the federal piece, there are certainly different bills, proposed legislation that will get at some different issues. The push-out bill, there's justice and policing bill, but unfortunately, we still have a struggle with how things are in the Senate with actually getting bills passed. So it's hard to say what will pass or how long it will take. To drill down a little bit more in my field around gun violence prevention, I know there've been some conversations with the Biden administration, and I was actually involved with the transition team around how we envision violence prevention and how do we center the communities that have been most impacted by gun violence. And that's not just a legislative fix, because laws are not going to be the be all and end all when it comes to addressing gun violence. We have to look at root causes. We have to invest money, resources, time, energy into the programs that are on the ground doing the work of violence prevention and peace promotion. And there's right now a big push in the Biden administration to prioritize funding for those community-based programs that are doing the work every day. A budget is a moral document. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the federal government does budget for that and whether some of the money that's being called for to invest in these programs actually comes forward. So that all remains to be seen. But in terms of a timeline, it's really hard to say.
All right. And then another question we received from Jeremy. Excuse me while I find it. I just had it and then it moved. Is there legislation that's being proposed that either of you know of, either state or nationally, to remove prison sentences for simple first-time misdemeanors?
So I can jump in on that on Massachusetts for what's happening here, because one of our legislative priorities with the coalition is something that we're doing in conjunction with Citizens for Juvenile Justice and some other organizations around expanding expungement. So for young people, for an expungement, if you're not familiar with the term, removes charges from someone's record. We have some level of expungement in Massachusetts for young people now, but it doesn't go far enough to remove nonviolent offenses. And the idea, and this was something they touched on in the film, was that if you have things on your record, it makes it really difficult to access housing, employment, educational opportunities. And that's a huge problem, because if we want folks to be safe and well in the world, they need to be able to access those basic resources. And to have folks come out of the context of incarceration and not be able to, or to have these charges on their record and prevent them from being able to get a job and get housing, it makes no sense, but it's also not good practice in terms of helping folks be safe and okay in the world. And so we're going to be really prioritizing this bill to try to have more charges removed from the records of young people so that they can get what they need to be okay.
Michael, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Really proud of Virginia. Virginia is one of the few states, I believe, that pretty much prevented expungement if you were convicted or if there was evidence sufficient for your guilt. So even in a situation where there was a first offender treatment and the case was ultimately dismissed upon doing community service or the like, if the judge found that there was evidence sufficient, you could never get that charge removed from your record. But there's been a lot of progressive change in Virginia when it comes to criminal justice reform, and that's one of them, is that now you will be able to get even convictions removed from your record after a period of time. And so I know that that's going to be very impactful. I can't tell you how many people that I've talked to who told me that, charges from 10, 15 years ago that they were, didn't have much of a consequence for, was keeping them from getting jobs. So yeah, there's definitely progress moving in that direction, because I think there's now a realization that those convictions can stain a person for a lot longer than they should.
I don't believe we have any questions yet in the Q&A, so please send those in if you want to get your question answered before we wrap up tonight. But if not, I'm just gonna jump back to one of my questions. So in the film, they actually talk a lot about how policing in some cases can actually lead to terrorism in some instances. So could we discuss how misdemeanors can be a gateway for police terror and murder disguised as public safety measures? And I want to actually give Jamal a chance to speak, since I think we have him back.
What was it?
How
disguised as a public safety measure?
Yeah, how do misdemeanors lead to terrorism and as a disguise for public safety measures? Or how can they be a gateway for public terror?
Clarify that to me, please.
I'm sorry, one more time.
Clarify that, because I can hear you clearer.
Oh, yeah. So the question is, how are misdemeanors used as a gateway for essentially police terror? So meaning for police to abuse their authority, particularly in Black and Brown communities, and that ultimately leads to things like the death of Michael Brown.
Well, I don't really think there's such like a misdemeanor. I've never had a misdemeanor charge, but at any point, like once you're out there or you're deemed a threat whatsoever, if you're talking about like a misdemeanor, like me having like a drug charge, it's like for marijuana possession or something like that. Yeah, I don't really see that. That question is kind of like I don't see it as being no misdemeanors. For me, I mean, a charge, if you're talking about like mitigating factors and what can lead to, you getting a bigger charge or even just dying, that's something else. But I've never seen like anyone, like, as far as a misdemeanor, like for instance, like I just read in the newspaper, the Globe, that somebody who was like in 2017, just before George Floyd, and incarcerated, well, he died where the CO had his knee on his neck. But the cop was, the CO was acquitted of that. So it can be anything that can lead to your death. I mean, any charge, any interaction with the police can lead to that. And to me, there's just no such thing as a misdemeanor, not in the nowadays. Your interaction can be as deadly as me having a gun in my hand. I mean, so that's how I don't see that one. Well, I'll just say that like that. But as far as public safety, even if I don't say, because you have a jazz player who's with his son, and being accused of having like somebody else's phone, and that could have been charged as misdemeanor. But if all that, the cameras and stuff wasn't there, who's to say what could have led where? So you just have a very, very thin rope in which to walk on, in which you'll cheat off at any moment where someone's life can be on the line. So I don't see no misdemeanors, especially in the nowadays. Public safety. If you move public safety from that and put it into health and human services, you may be talking about a whole other thing, because the police are not really skilled or equipped to be dealing with a lot of the things that they're dealing with on society. Whereas someone who, they can be there as far as security reasons to help so that nothing goes astray. Especially when you have people who have mental illnesses or experience where they should have someone who can have to talk them down. If you want some more public safety in that line of work. But other than that, if I'm engaged with the police, and it can be something so minute as like me going to the store, me stealing something from the store, and me losing my life over that, which you've heard over that even in time. There is no such thing as a misdemeanor, not to me. I'm sorry if I couldn't really answer that question like that. That's just my opinion and how I see it, based on, I'm gonna give it statistics show that people die just for going to stores. And I want to go to stores there. I want to go to school. I want to get some orange juice and some bag of chips, but I don't have the money to pay for it, so I'm gonna steal it. Ultimately, I'm hungry. I don't see that part. So those are things I see because I see those cases.
Yes, thank you so much. Ruth and Michael, did you want to answer the question? I'll restate it. How has racial terrorism been embedded, or my bad. Can we discuss how misdemeanors are a gateway for police terror and murder in disguise as public safety measures?
The thing that comes up for me is I don't know how we could classify jaywalking as a public safety issue, and yet the issue of jaywalking came up so many times in this film. I've jaywalked, I don't know how many times. And is it the smartest thing to do traffic-wise, especially in the streets of Boston? Probably not. But is it a public safety issue? But I've never thought twice about it because I haven't had to. So the idea that someone can be so violently assaulted for jaywalking, just there's no way to justify that.
Absolutely.
Well, those people who would advocate for stronger law enforcement and enforcing the violation of any law would cite, I think it's called the broken window phenomenon, or basically if you allow small petty crimes to go uncorrected, unrecognized, unpunished, then it will lead to further criminal conduct. Now, of course, I haven't researched that issue, but I do know that police do use misdemeanors and petty crimes as a way to exert control over people and communities. There are many communities in this country that are like occupied territories. the reason why you have so many people in the communities that are arrested is because there's such a police presence there. People can get away with using drugs. People can get away with most crimes. But if you're in a place where the police are there to exert control and authority over you, then certainly that's going to manifest in more people in those communities, in essence, being terrorized. So I definitely think that this film really helped me to really see the history of, policing, and basically giving police officers the discretion to decide, hey, these people or person are people that we want to investigate, search, arrest. So absolutely misdemeanors are used as a form of police terror, or a way for police to exert terror.
Thank you. So we have just a few minutes. I want to give a chance for someone from our audience to ask a question. So we have Kevin who has their hand raised. I want to let you ask your question.
I've just promoted them to panelists. They have to turn their audio and video on to ask their question.
Hello, hello, good evening.
Hi, we can hear you.
Great. My name is Kevin Sibley. I'm the Director of Reentry for the Mayor's Office of Returning Citizens. Thank you for having this event this evening. It was very informative. One of the most important areas that I encourage everyone, the listeners, to understand is the history of policing, why the police force has been created. Very interesting question about the last, why are misdemeanors used to engage with the arrest of and subsequent harassment and murder of many of people from underrepresented communities. It's simply because they can. There are no social constructs that provide for a community board to put together to begin to reprimand the police force. And when we become complacent in our communities and scared because the police continue to harass, continue to arrest, it is not a new phenomenon. It has existed since the police was formed in the South to gather runaway slaves and to manage the immigrant population of the South. What we must do as a community is understand that all politics are local. And with these local politics, we need to continue to urge our local state representation, our city councilors to enact the proper legislation that would allow for a transparent view from the community perspective, not from this perspective that currently exists, to assist in the reform. Personally, criminal justice is an oxymoron. It's criminality, period. And so as we begin to understand what it is that we're working with, we must engage our elected officials to change the legislation so therefore we can be involved as a community and begin to not only police ourselves and have the confidence to do that, but to engage in how the criminal system is currently run. Thank you for your time for my comment.
Thank you, Kevin. And we are coming up at time. So I'm going to wrap things up for this evening. But thank you so much to our panelists. You guys were very informative. I learned a lot from this panel. And thank you everyone so much for coming and for watching the film. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.